Okay, Madam Chair, we are recording and broadcasting, and the webinar has been started. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Travis. I call the meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board to order. You have a new face. I hope you're going to go easy on me, as this is my first meeting as chair. So, first order of business is an overview of the public comment process. For those participating remotely, we'll take written questions and comments. Please email your public comments and questions to disb@deltacouncil.ca.gov. And in your request, indicate the agenda item for which you'd like to provide comments. If you prefer to provide oral comments and questions, use the raised hand function in Zoom or send an email explaining which agenda item you'd like to provide comments on. And please wait until you're prompted to make your public comment. And with that, we will go back to roll call. So we'll start. Lisa Wainger, no new declarations. Steve.
Steve Brandt, nothing new.
Virginia.
Virginia Dale, no new declarations.
Joe.
No new declarations.
Jay.
Jay Lund, no new declaration.
Tanya.
Anya Heikala, no new declarations.
Tom.
Holzer, no new declarations.
All right, we're temporarily skipping Diane McKnight. Bob.
Bob Nyman, nothing new here.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, can I interrupt a second? We have a small technical issue on my end. I apologize. Can we pause just for a moment?
We can pause.
Audio check, quick audio check.
We hear you.
Okay, Madam Chair, I apologize for the delay. We are back.
That's great. As this is my first meeting, I thought I was going to be the one responsible for awkward pauses, but it turns out there are other sources. So let's move on to the agenda. So I think we were just at the point where we were, I'm going to review the agenda. Okay. So you'll see that we have a very shortened agenda today. So this little gap in time probably isn't even that important, because all we really want to accomplish today is give an update on where we are in reviewing the EIR. And since that's all encompassing, we don't have much else progress to report at this time. And we'll hear some updates from our partners. And so that pretty much rounds it out. So I see that Obey has joined us. Obey, would you like to say your name and whether you have any declarations?
My name is Jayant Obey Shekhar, Florida International University. I don't have any declarations.
Thank you. Welcome, Obey.
Thank you.
Okay, so Edmund, do we have any public comments before we get started?
There are none.
Great. Okay, so we'll go into the next thing, which are an explanation of what I'm doing here. So I took on the role of chair as of September 1st, and Steve has stepped into the position of past chair, and Jay has rotated out of the chairship. And this gives me, they both are entirely too happy about that, but this gives me an opportunity to acknowledge them and share some thoughts with you about what I see as my role as the chair. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge the incredible service of Steve Brandt and Jay Lund. We have been incredibly well served by these scientists. Most critically, they stepped up to an extraordinary level when they were needed to ensure the persistence of the board. The board really would not be here without them. And it was really their steadfast belief that the board had a critical role in Delta's decision-making that enables us to be here today. So that's the most important thing to say. More generally, I have great appreciation for Steve's leadership during the time when the board's funding was cut. Now that everything's running smoothly, it's really easy to forget how hard Steve had to work to engage us, to create a consensus plan of what the board should do to operate at partial capacity. And those were dark and frustrating times, and he persisted in his belief that the board would be restored, at least publicly, and he kept us all going with his conviction and good humor. And so even when not facing down a crisis, I'd say both men have been highly effective leaders in keeping this board productive and aligned on the issues that matter. But I think it was that under duress moment when we really saw some important leadership skills. Now, Jay, I want to mention that Jay, with his partner in crime, Tom, has recently been receiving superlatives for his ability to communicate complex ideas about water reliability to managers. And I think that's just the most recent example of this skill set we're going to miss. We still have him around for one more month, but and he has assured me that he's willing to stay in touch with the board. But I think I'm going to miss Jay's really practical nature on a daily basis. I'm not going to forget something soon that he said to me, which was during a recent conversation, he said, "You can spend a lot of energy figuring out the perfect thing to do, or you can pick something and get it done." And it was good advice, and it was something that I needed to hear in that moment. And I'm going to miss those kind of comments from him. But I do encourage the remaining board members to repeat that advice to me whenever needed. But the good news is that he has threatened to call in and heckle us, or at least answer our calls. So we'll take whatever we can get. And I just want to thank both. I want to thank Jay for all he's done in his various leadership roles, and I want to thank Steve for sticking around to watch my back. Yeah, if we were all in the same room, I would ask for a round of applause, but it's a little awkward on Zoom. But yes, virtual applause, virtual toast, ching ching. Okay, so now on to me. You have me now as chair. What's that going to do for you? I'm excited to be chairing this board. I know we make jokes about the extra burden of being chair, but I really am happy to be working with this particular set of people because I'm deeply impressed by your varied expertise and intellects. From studying the history of the Delta, I've learned that managing for what we now call the co-equal goals has always been complex and challenging. That part is not new. And that has spawned this already truly impressive set of scientists in the Delta that we now work within, that they have, I'm talking about the scientists now at the agencies, the academics, the nonprofits, the businesses. They have really been working to address these complex challenges. So what is our role? Well, we have this very complex system, but on top of that existing complexity, you're adding in now an increase in extreme conditions, more variability, fundamental changes in biophysical processes. And I think that suggests a need for some changes in how science is done. Decisions are going to be made under greater uncertainty under future conditions. And so what that means in terms of changing science, to me anyway, is that we're going to rely less on a single best estimate of the future and more on a range of what are all the potential futures we need to think about to minimize regret. And that is another way of saying we want to be less wrong more of the time than we would be if we were very confident in our predictions of the future. And I think the work that's already been done with the water supply reliability moves us in that direction. But there's quite a lot more to do to demonstrate how to gamble smarter. And I hope the board will take on some of those challenges. So identifying that uncertainty issue is an example of what I see as a big part of my job as chair, is that I really want to help the board find its comparative advantage. That's an economics term that was originally coined to describe how some countries, due to natural resources or climate or where they were located in transportation networks, gave them the ability to provide goods and services more efficiently, more cheaply. In modern times, the characteristics that impart comparative advantage have to do with the people, the labor force. Think about Silicon Valley's strengths in terms of their ability to attract highly trained and innovative people that enables them to have the strength that they do. So now for the board, while I wouldn't say that we're Silicon Valley, I think our strengths are diverse experiences where we've applied rigorous science to a wide variety of questions. And that skill set and our independence allow us to see how changes in science methods or priorities can be beneficial. And it might not be the kind of insights that come from people very entrenched in an existing system. So while we have to be humble in recognizing that specific science needs are context dependent, and we are going to have limitations in terms of providing a very prescribed set of steps for moving forward, I think our broad perspective is the thing that we can offer to help identify new analyses and that lead to new solutions. And something that motivates me as chair is I've seen science advisory boards make a big difference. When I was chair of the Chesapeake Bay Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee, which I'll mercifully shorten now to STAC, I asked people, when has the board been most effective? And the most common answer I heard was when EPA was taken to court over the cap that they established on nutrients and sediments to that bay on the other coast. The decision was being attacked on many fronts, but one of the key fronts was that the models being used were inadequate. You don't know what you're doing, you can't set these nutrient caps accurately. And hopefully, I hope every modeler is kind of chuckling right now, because very few models will stand up to extreme scrutiny. They're by their nature a simplification of the system, and you can always find flaws. But it was STAC's review of those models that said this is a solid and rigorous method for making such estimations. Sure, it has flaws. We pointed out some flaws, but having said that this was a good approach, a solid approach, that swayed the judge to side with those who wanted to limit pollution. So I know this stuff matters, and I have asked the same kind of question to Delta stakeholders, and I've heard many answers. But a common answer I heard was when we produced the memo, people before me, when they produced the memo on the rapid change to DPIC, or the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. And in that memo, the board nudged that group to think about managing for rapid change in the Delta. So that's very consistent with my earlier comments about managing for uncertainty. The other thing I heard was that this board has a unique role in the science enterprise because of its independence in listening to diverse constituencies. So we have an open door policy in the sense that we invite people to send us written comments and provide time during all of our meetings for public comments. But we also know we want to do more to hear from folks. And it's not just listening to stakeholders, but I think we can also use rigorous social science to reveal unknown relationships between people and nature, between institutions and outcomes. There's a lot we can learn. In my work, predominantly in the agricultural community, I've learned that people often make assumptions about why people are acting the way they do. But when you get out there and you systematically evaluate incentives and talk to people about why they make choices, you get insights about how to align goals. And it rarely lines up with the assumptions people made before they did that research. So because all environmental problems have a social component, I think we have a lot we could learn from communities. And I think the more insights we can glean through these methods, the more effective we can be with providing the science that supports management. All right, I doubt I will ever speak this long again on the board. I took my shot here. So let me just sum up the points that I think are important moving forward. So I want my job to be to help the board find its comparative advantage wherever that may lie. I provided one idea, which was that dealing with future risks and helping decision-making under uncertainty will be one of our key challenges. I have a personal agenda to increase awareness of how social science is done and the benefits of that kind of work. And then I want to widen our already open door to diverse voices to hear about issues and learn about potential solutions in the Delta. So with that, I thank you all for having some faith in me as your new chair, and I look forward to working with all of you. All right, moving on. You're stuck with me now. Let's see, next agenda item. I guess I still talk because I tell you now about some updates. Dr. Jay Lund and Dr. Tom Holzer have released a blog, Smarter Gambling with California's Water Challenges, that I alluded to. And that's going to help with outreach of the Delta ISB's recently completed water supply reliability review. And a copy of that is in your meeting package. And we encourage folks to go ahead and take a look at that blog, which nicely summarizes some key points of that report. Also in your meeting package, we received general correspondence from constituents, from stakeholders. OSHA Reserve sent us 2022 draft EIR links to the yeah, to the EIR. So that was submitted in August 22. Now we have the final, or the draft final. California Water Research shared many blog posts on the scientific and technical issues with the Delta Conveyance Project design and operations modeling. Matt Conover provided an oral update to Delta ISB staff for the Delta ISB to consider a recent UCLA study that found a 1,000-year flood coming sooner due to warmer atmospheric rivers, situations where there would be no snowpack and faster runoff. We've been talking about some of these issues, and that was published in Science. We have that link. And then various individuals have sent information. We received 12 letters between August 13th and September 4th, a total of 982 letters to date, titled "The Delta Conveyance Project is not a solution to drought and climate change." And all of these, all of this information has been recorded, read, and passed on to the chairship. Are there any public comments or any other questions or comments?
There are no public comments.
Any questions or comments from the board? No, okay. All right, well, our next opportunity is to hear from Virginia Moreno, who's going to update us on the Delta Stewardship Council and executive officer goings on. So thank you, Virginia.
Good morning again, and thank you, Chair Wainger. It's a privilege to be with you today, and I want to apologize because I too was having technical difficulties, and if you can't tell, I'm actually in a drive-through of a Starbucks so that I can get Wi-Fi today, so I can appreciate the technical difficulties we all have. And I want to again offer my sincere gratitude to outgoing Chair Brandt's leadership, and I too have been a short timer on the council, but I've had the opportunity to interact with him a fair bit. And while I know the leadership is transitioning to very capable hands, I will miss working directly with Dr. Brandt. But I'm very glad too to see that he will continue to benefit, and where we will benefit from his service and his expertise continuing on the board. Just a few things I would like to highlight today. Last month, the council held a very informative and moving meeting in Stockton, California, to hear from council staff and the council's environmental justice expert group about environmental justice concerns in the Delta. The presentation included an overview of interviews conducted with environmental justice organizations and advocates to inform the development of an EJ issue paper, a recommendation that came from the 2019 Delta Plan 5-year review. Through this paper, the council aims to build a network of community leaders and organizations to inform and support the council's environmental justice work, to identify the associated issues impacting communities in and around the Delta, and to chart options to address those issues. The presentation and discussion at the meeting showed how much work there is still to be done in this space with regard to climate change adaptation, flood risk, water quality, pollution, and tribal sovereignty, among many other concerns. However, the EJ expert group panelist stories left me invigorated to continue the council's work in these areas, as we have a responsibility as the stewards of the Delta to set the tone and the example for how environmental justice work is conducted. In fact, I'm very proud of how the EJ experts we heard from lauded our process of engaging with the community thus far. And I'm going to tell you, hopefully you have a chance to take a look at that presentation. I was truly captivated by the essence of the work, the essence of those presentations, and really the essence of what this means for us moving forward as a council. The council also heard from the Delta Conservancy and the Delta Protection Commission on their current efforts, including the continued work to establish a Delta Heritage Area, which I'm super excited and stoked about, as well as from the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, who highlighted the recent release of their updated Estuary Blueprint, an essential document in Bay Delta planning. I highly, again, encourage the ISB to watch the recording of this meeting particular the EJ segment after lunch. As I said, it was informative and truly captivating. With regard to DPIC, I also want to share a couple of DPIC updates. First, the DPIC Restoration Subcommittee held its third meeting on September 29th. The subcommittee heard an overview of the ECO amendment and endorsed a work plan for the subcommittee, which will now go to the DPIC for their endorsement. And speaking of the next DPIC meeting, in case you haven't heard, we are taking an active 6-month pause. The DPIC Restoration Subcommittee will continue to meet, but the November DPIC meeting will be canceled. We plan to use this time in a very strategic way, mostly to get curious about how we can re-energize DPIC, which is something that I'm very interested in doing, and be responsive to the needs of the Delta Plan implementation and DPIC agency needs. Our next meeting will be scheduled on September the 22nd in Sacramento at the Library Galleria. The meeting will include a public workshop to present revisions and gather public input on the draft amendments to the Council's appeals procedures for covered actions, of which we hope to consider for adoption at a future council meeting. In addition, we will also have the wonderful Delta Water Master, Mr. Michael George, who will join us for his regular update, which is always timely and hugely and highly informative. And I encourage the ISB to tune in for this meeting as well. With regard to the water supply reliability estimation report, the council is looking, again, paying very close attention to, and there are a couple of things that I would like to mention. First, I want to thank the Independent Science Board for its water supply reliability estimation report and what it has submitted to the council. And we are, again, currently finalizing a response letter to you, which we expect to complete very soon. And lastly, after discussion with Chair Wainger and Dr. Brandt, the council will be transitioning to provide an update to ISB meetings on a bi-monthly basis. But we can do more often as needed. However, we think that every other month might be more effective and more useful for us as a council. And to close, I just want to thank the Independent Science Board for the opportunity to join you today. And I look forward to working with Dr. Wainger, Lisa, in your new role, and to you and in your new capacity. And again, as always, just thank the Independent Science Board for what you do, for what you represent. I was just in Los Angeles yesterday, and I always try to applaud your efforts as an independent science board, your expertise, and how we truly rely on you providing us with the most essential scientific data for us to be able to make conscientious decisions moving forward. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Virginia. That was very helpful. And yes, we do understand. We're going to hear from you every other time. And I think that will probably work well, especially if we can get into a regular schedule of meeting in person every other time, and then hopefully getting to know each other a little better. So that will be great.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. So I have a few more updates under this item, agenda item 4. We will.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, first of all, Virginia, thanks for the kind words, and it's certainly been a joy working with you as well, and I look forward to continue doing that as part of the chairship. I had a question about your restoration subcommittee. I went through the document, and it's actually reasonably comprehensive. A lot of work outlined there, and I know it hasn't really been presented to DPIC per se, but what's the vision about who would actually, if adopted by DPIC, who would actually carry out that work? Is it the committee that would do the work? Would they form? It was unclear who exactly would be in charge, I guess, of doing that activities outlined there.
Steve, that is an excellent question. And it is such an excellent question that I'm going to actually have to defer that to Amanda, which I hope Amanda is on.
She is. She popped up as soon as the question was asked. Go ahead, Amanda.
Hi, good morning, ISB members. Amanda Bowl, Special Assistant for Planning and Science at the Delta Stewardship Council. I coordinate DPIC. and oversee the DPIC restoration subcommittee. The plan with the subcommittee and the work plan that is that has been developed is that the council, working very closely with the Delta Conservancy, is going to be coordinating the activities in that, but we will be really partnering with a number of DPIC agencies for the actual implementation of a number of those actions. We plan to actually spend the next few months, especially while DPIC isn't meeting, to kind of fine tune the work plan, to look at timelines, to prioritize. I mean, there's a lot in that work plan. There's a lot of activities, a lot of work that needs to be addressed. So we really need to prioritize. So I think that'll be our next first step is that, in addition to doing a restoration forum in the early winter, early 2023. And that particular activity will be coordinated by the council and the Conservancy jointly. And so we're working with locals as well to make sure that we're really providing a forum and an opportunity for locals and agencies to come together. So again, it's this first major activity around the restoration forum will be coordinated by the council and the Conservancy, but the other actions will really be looking to partnering with other DPIC agencies on implementation.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, because as you know, in the science needs assessment and elsewhere, we've always talked about interagency collaboration and coordination and doing it in a rigorous way, which often requires someone to take the lead or some group to take the lead and pay for it and all that sort of stuff. And so this, given the, I guess, the comprehensive nature of that plan, plus the value of restoration in general as a component of the work being done in the Delta, that coordination around that activity might make a good example of how to do it across other topics and things like that. So that's why I was curious. And
great questions.
Oh, and I'll just add, if I can, just also that the council is so supportive of this effort that we have actually we have dedicated staff to this effort as well. Dylan Chappell, who some of you may know from the science program, will be coordinating the work of the restoration subcommittee, working very closely with Dr. Rachel Wigington from the Delta Conservancy. So we've got two really great folks that are really kind of taking the lead on this effort, who are very passionate about restoration as well, and are very excited to be kind of diving in and focusing the council and the Conservancy's efforts around restoration in this way.
It's great to see. Thanks so much. All right, well, first let me check in and see if there are, so the thing I'm supposed to say is that you have updates in your packets. There's written materials to support this update. And then if other board members have questions, ask them now. Not hearing any, I'll turn to Edmund and see if we have any public comments.
There are no public comments.
Okay, well then I think we move on to the next agenda item, number 5, which is the Delta Lead Scientist Report. So thank you, Virginia and Amanda, and we'll call up Laurel now to give us an update. Oh, and I probably should have explained, because Laurel is on the road, she's pre-recorded this, but is live to answer questions.
Good morning and welcome to Lisa as the new chair of the ISB. Congratulations. Today, I'm actually joining you all by phone. I'm in transit to a meeting. And so just to eliminate any uncertainties about cell phone reception, I wanted to pre-record this report, but hopefully I will be in a place where the reception is good and available to address your questions. I'll just have an abbreviated report today. I wanted to give you an update on the harmful algal bloom event that has been making national headlines for the San Francisco Bay, and talk about the council's role, what it is and what it is not. And then after another brief announcement, I will hand it over to Henry DeBay, our new Deputy Executive Officer for Science, and he'll introduce himself and say a few words, and then report on another Delta Science Program activity. So moving along here, As far as this update on the harmful algal bloom event goes, I want to first of all acknowledge that all of the content that I'll share with you today comes from Pascal Gertler, a senior environmental scientist with the Delta Science Program, and also David Sen, who is a scientist at the San Francisco Estuary Institute. And they've been very generous in sharing the most up-to-date information about the bloom. Well, first of all, the bloom only recently made headlines in August, in part because that is when the massive fish kill developed, but it developed in late July of this year of 2022. The initial evidence of the bloom was detected around the Alameda, Oakland area, part of the East Bay. And it was a bloom that was identified as Heterosigma akashiwo on August 4th of 2022, just the day after this chlorophyll image was taken. By the way, this progression of images that you're looking at shows chlorophyll derived from Sentinel-3, which has its issues as an indicator of harmful algal blooms, but it is useful as a rough indicator of the areal extent of the bloom. This organism is a dinoflagellate. It's not a cyanobacterial harmful algal bloom. It's a small dinoflagellate. It forms spores. It is known to be toxic to fish and thought to potentially be toxic to other wildlife, although the exact toxin has not yet been isolated and the mechanism of toxicity has not been well characterized. It is thought to be a relatively cosmopolitan organism. It could grow successfully across a wide range of temperatures, salinity, and light conditions. And actually, it's not new to the bay at all. It's been, as I'll show you in another slide, it's been detected previously over a course of many years, but it has never reached the same aerial extent that we just saw in this past year. And in fact, this organism has been identified as a priority harmful algal bloom forming organism for the San Francisco Bay Nutrient Management Strategy. And it's this through this program, the NMS, that a lot of the sampling that has informed our understanding of this organism and this particular bloom has been done. This is a particularly notable bloom because, first of all, the chlorophyll A concentrations measured during the August 10th monitoring event are the highest that have been observed in the South Bay over 40 years of monitoring. It's also a really important event because as feared at earlier stages in this bloom, massively widespread low dissolved oxygen concentrations did develop throughout the bay, leading to a very significant fish kill. And this is also of interest because many are interpreting it as a sign or the type of event that could occur with much greater frequency or severity in the future. So I mentioned the low dissolved oxygen. Oh, did I skip one? I did skip a slide. Okay. So I did mention a little bit earlier that this organism is routinely detected in the bay. It was actually first detected in the summer of 2002. And since then, it's been observed in the San Francisco Bay with relatively moderate frequency, but generally low abundance over the past 30 years. So this graph shows observations of this organism and its density in water in 4 different locations throughout the bay over the past 30 or so years. So this was the first detection. It was detected in Richardson Bay, and abundances comparable to the current event have previously been observed in the San Francisco Bay, although rarely, and the statistic that's been used is about 2 out of every 30 years. But the evidence suggests that those prior events affected much smaller areas than the ongoing August into September 2022 event. And there has been a lot of speculation about what has caused this particular event, what was the trigger, and I'll get into that in a few more slides. But I did just want to show you this slide that Pascal provided me with that shows this dissolved oxygen minimum that the system went through in early September 1st. You'll see some recovery of dissolved oxygen since then. And one of the hypotheses is that depletion of available nutrients in the bay by this high productivity event might have limited the bloom and then caused it to subside. But that's still a hypothesis that is under consideration and testing. So what has really made the headlines here has been the fish kill and the associated stench that has gone along with that. Here's a photograph of Pascal collecting some sturgeon, and I'll get into what the council's role is here, but the fish that you're seeing in these images are dead sturgeon. So there have been a lot of questions about what triggered this bloom, and you'll see some sensationalist headlines out there. Here's one from the Chronicle last week that says poop and pee fueled the huge algal bloom in San Francisco Bay. And it certainly is true that this estuary is one of the most nutrient enriched estuaries in the US. And the high level of nutrients sustained this bloom, but nutrients alone aren't the answer. Nutrients have been elevated in this estuary for many years. And yet, as I have said before, these type of bloom events are fairly rare. And so there are a number of competing hypotheses out there right now about what might have triggered this particular event. And it's likely due to some combination of unprecedentedly warm water, low residence time, and high nutrients. There's also been speculation that a higher than usual population of anchovies might have depleted the population of zooplankton that would otherwise consume these organisms and keep phytoplankton at the lowest levels of the food chain in check. It's going to be really interesting to see what the ongoing studies reveal. And so with respect to those ongoing studies, the monitoring that usually takes place in the bay in association with the nutrient monitoring system observation program consists of a number of both fixed moorings and stations that are repeatedly visited by ship-based surveys. I am told that some agencies were able to increase their sampling in response to this particular event. You'll see that some of these sites, particularly those operated by the USGS and or DWR, do extend into the Delta. But one thing I want to emphasize is that understanding the root cause of this problem does require an integrative understanding of phenomena happening across that Bay Delta interface. There are questions about the role of nutrients in this event. And one of the things that scientists in the Delta are pointing out is that the upgrade of the regional sand wastewater treatment plant has substantially reduced nitrogen inputs by wastewater into the Delta. And that also results in lower loads to the bay. And there are questions floating around now about whether wastewater treatment plants in the bay should undergo similar types of retrofitting. But this really requires a comprehensive understanding of how nutrients move through the system and are exchanged between the bay and the Delta. There's also questions about the role that clearing water columns, in part due to a reduction of sediment available from the hydraulic mining pulse, and in part due to trapping by submersed aquatic vegetation and invasive bivalves. There's questions about the extent to which that water clearing could contribute to these bloom events too. And again, this is something that requires an integrative modeling program across the Bay Delta interface. And right now, at least within the Delta and particularly across this interface, that level of coordination and integration that's needed doesn't yet exist. And so I think this is something that you all recognized in your monitoring enterprise review report, and something that the Delta Stewardship Council recognizes as an emerging need. And so one of the slides that I'll show you a couple after this, again, highlights that we are trying to advance a coordinated monitoring framework for HABs in the Delta that's compatible with the HABs modeling that's occurring in the Bay through a workshop that takes place in November. But I wanted to highlight a few other ways in which the Delta Stewardship Council has been involved in responding to this particular event. And one is through a sturgeon project that that Pascal Gertler at the council holds a permit for, paid for by the Delta Stewardship Council, and is a project that she's a collaborator on. So just in the background, white sturgeon and green sturgeon have been declining in abundance even prior to this harmful algal bloom. And so Pascal is part of a collaborative project that uses citizen science to seek reports of sturgeon carcasses that Pascal and others on the team can then go and collect. They clip the ray fins from the sturgeon and send them to a UC Davis lab for processing. And that processing provides us with information about the life history of that particular sturgeon individual. It provides information about where in the Bay or the Delta they have been spending their time, what they have been eating, and could ultimately provide some insight into causes of elevated mortality over the past few years. As you might imagine, with the fish kill, this citizen scientist initiative has been yielding many more positive reports of sturgeon carcasses, allowing for much more sample collection. So here's a flyer that shows how this project is being communicated. And there's an iNaturalist component to this reporting as well. And it looks like that slide that I had didn't actually save. So I will just skip ahead to say a few other ways that the Delta Science Program is involved in this initiative, or involved in this response. And as I've reported on before, we have funded through 2 projects through the PSN that look at underlying causes of harmful algal bloom events, with an emphasis on cyanobacterial harmful algal bloom events. But one of the research teams that we're funding is the USGS research team that has also been highly involved in collecting data on this heterosigma bloom event. We also are preparing to release the next edition of State of Bay Delta Science in December, and that includes an article authored by Rafe Kudela that is fairly comprehensive in its reporting on harmful algal bloom events across that Bay Delta interface. And so we will provide communication materials about that article closer to the release of the edition. And then the final thing that I mentioned earlier is that we're sponsoring this harmful algal blooms workshop that I've reported on to you before. This is just a repeat slide to remind you of the goals of the workshop. And really the big goal that everyone has their eye on right now is the development of a Delta region specific harmful algal bloom monitoring strategy that serves as a framework for monitoring, modeling, and addressing current knowledge gaps. With this recent event, there's been a lot of discussion on targeting scientists who have been active in trying to understand this event in the Bay, and inviting them to participate in breakout sessions on how such a monitoring strategy could be better coordinated with the monitoring that's taking place in the Bay. And so I think it's going to be a well-attended workshop. And I did want to say that registration is live now, and we encourage ISB members to sign up to participate in the workshop. The workshop is in person or virtual, but there are a limited number of in-person slots that will be granted on a first come, first served basis. So that registration information is available on the Delta Science Program website, and it has also been released as a listserv as of early this week. So that's really what I had to say about this bloom. The other thing that I wanted to flag for you is that we are very rapidly approaching the Bay Delta Social Science Community of Practices 2022 event, which is the Advancing Interdisciplinary Research Symposium. This is a two-part symposium that aims to spread awareness of different disciplines within social science and how they might be integrated into the larger body of Delta science. So to grow capacity and literacy for the social sciences to inform decision-making in the Bay Delta. And then the second part of the workshop seeks to form interdisciplinary working groups for identification of low-hanging fruit, projects that are ripe for synthesis. And potentially these groups could write proposals for research that might be funded through future proposal solicitations. The registration for this is now live. Here's the link. And this workshop takes place over 2 days on 2 separate weeks. October 14th will focus on training. It's a virtual 2-hour session that provides broader education about social science disciplines and tools that those disciplines used and how those tools might be integrated into different types of projects. And then the workshop takes place on August 20th, and it includes, or the highlight of this workshop really is the breakout sessions that will hopefully stimulate the development of these working groups and mock interdisciplinary proposals. Now, with that brief update, I want to hand it over to Henry DeBay, our new Deputy Executive Officer for Science, and he'll provide a few words of introduction, and then he'll also talk about the process that we're involved in for recruiting the new Sea Grant State Science Fellows. And just before I hand it over to Henry, I did want to say that prior to being promoted to Deputy Executive Officer for Science, from his previous position as a program manager within the science program, Henry spent over 13 years working at the intersection of environmental science and policy. He's worked with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the Pew Charitable Trusts, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and then, of course, most recently, the Council's Environmental Program Manager for the Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit. He holds a Master of Science in Environmental Science from Yale University and a Bachelor of Science in Geography and Environmental Studies from UCLA. I will now turn it over to Henry. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Laurel, for that introduction. Good morning, board members, and congratulations to the incoming and outgoing chairship members, including Dr. Lund, Dr. Brandt, and Dr. Wainger. And thank you, Chair Wainger, for your thoughts on your new role. So as Laurel mentioned, my name is Henry DeBay, and I'm the Council's new Deputy Executive Officer for Science. And I'm feeling very grateful and honored and a tad overwhelmed to represent the Delta Science Program, including all of its amazing staff and important work in this new capacity. And for those of you who know her, Louise Conrad was in this position previously, and so she's left me with pretty big shoes to fill. But I'm going to do my best. But very much looking forward to interacting with the ISB in this new role. So on behalf of the Delta lead scientist, I wanted to provide an additional update to the board regarding the California Sea Grant State Fellowship Program. So in 2023 or next year, the Delta Stewardship Council will host 5 California Sea Grant State Fellows, and one of these fellows will be assigned to provide halftime support to the Delta Independent Science Board. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this fellowship program, it matches highly motivated and accomplished graduate students who have or are close to finishing their degrees with, or are close to finishing their degrees, excuse me, matches them with host government agencies and organizations for a 12-month paid fellowship. So a key step in assigning fellows to host agencies happens through the so-called virtual matching workshop, which is essentially a series of interviews. And so for the ISB fellowship position, these interviews will occur on October 11th and October 12th. And the interview team to recruit the Delta ISB fellow is slated to include Karen Kafitz, who supervises ISB support staff, as you probably all know, Allegra LaFair, the current Delta ISB fellow, staff member of Karen's team, and then a Delta ISB representative. And as I understand it, more details will follow on this. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Henry, and welcome. We're glad to have your expertise. And I think there's been a lot of change over lately, so we can all just figure out how to serve these roles the best we can together. And so now I think we should just see if we have some questions on any of those presentations. So Tom is quick to the gate. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, my question is to Laurel. Laurel, is your phone working? No, can't tell.
I guess that's a no, but Henry may also be able to answer your question, Tom. So go ahead and ask. Laurel may pop in.
Okay,
if not,
it's a pretty specific question about the
Zoom brief. I'm here now. Zoom briefly kicked me off, but I am here.
Okay. Yeah, you made a comment about the declining sediment load from the hydraulic mining. And of course, the sediment load decrease increases the light that gets into the water, making the hab more possible. I'm curious, do you have any sense of the magnitude of that decline in recent time? Because I mean, it started a long time ago.
Yeah. There's an excellent paper by Dave Schulheim, authors, that came out a few years ago that I could share with you that documents that makes that quantification. And according to that paper, those authors estimated that basically we're at a declining period from the era of hydraulic mining. So we're at the tail end of that change period.
Okay, could you share that with me? I'd appreciate it.
Yes, I will pass it on to Edmund to share with the post-meeting materials.
Thank you.
thanks, Laurel. And just so you know, you're breaking up a little, but I think we heard the important bits, and the paper probably is the most important thing. It's great to see that emphasis on it's great to see that emphasis on the HABs. You know, it's very consistent with a priority the board has recognized as well. I understand there's more questions than answers right now on that one bloom and what killed the fish, but we hope you'll continue to update us on that. And then I'm sure Diane is planning on participating in that workshop. I'm not sure if other members are, but we'll try to stay in touch with that workshop too. Did anyone else have questions? Okay. Well, we are cruising through our agenda. So I think we could take a quick break now. Folks,
Lisa, we do have a public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the public comment. Yes, let's hear public comments. Thanks, Edmund.
Yes, we have one from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, we're in the process of unmuting your microphone, so give us a second. All right, Deirdre, your microphone has been unmuted. Thank you.
Yeah, it's Deirdre Desjardins from California Water Research, and Jim Klern published a paper in 2020 in which he warned about this, and I just wanted to read one section from it. Policymakers ask if there are plausible scenarios of altered freshwater inputs, warming of the surface layer, and rising water level, that regions of San Francisco Bay could become stratified long enough to promote large blooms and for bottom waters to lose their oxygen content. These scenarios can be developed from California's fourth climate change assessment and its projections of regional warming, more frequent, larger magnitude and longer duration heat waves, increased magnitude of high precipitation events, and sea level rise potentially reaching 3 meters by 2100. Equally important is the future trajectory of water clarity that has increased over recent decades because of altered wind patterns and reduced sediment supplies to the estuary. So, and he says these several 3D models of hydrodynamics and sediment transport have been calibrated and validated for San Francisco Bay. These kinds of physical models can be coupled with nutrient phytoplankton models to assess the likelihood that chlorophyll A levels will regularly exceed numeric targets in a future climate. These scenarios can also provide policymakers a basis for deciding if regulatory policies should be adapted to current or future hydroclimatic conditions. And I immediately saw the harmful algal bloom and asked if they'd had modeling and what the modeling had showed. But this seems to point for the need for more modeling. Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. And as we said, we'd like to stay in touch with what they learn about this bloom, so we can all keep learning about this. So we do have a scheduled break at this point, which I think we should just go ahead and take. And I'm going to encourage folks to take a look, if you haven't already, at the outline, which I know you have already, but take another look at the outline we're going to be discussing right after the break. And that will give us a chance to have a focused discussion. It's not a long discussion planned on that agenda item on the outline. We really just want folks to tee up whether they think their comments are going to fit in that structure. And we'll be working with that structure to see if it works. And so we're asking for that sort of initial response to that. So yeah, let's go ahead and take that break. It's 10, I have almost 10, well, sorry, 10:05 your time, 10:05 California time. Let's check back at 20 after the hour for it. Let's have a 15-minute break and we'll move into that next agenda item. Anybody have concerns about that? Or are we good to go? All right, let's take that break. Looks like we're here, so let's go ahead and get started.
Can you wait for Travis to give you the okay before you start, Lisa?
Yes,
okay.
Madam Chair, we are recording and broadcasting. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so before we get into any discussion, I want to give a few updates and some background. Also, I just want to be clear that we're planning on a very abbreviated discussion today of both just, a quick review of the outline. We'll have more opportunities to amend that with deeper thought. And we're also looking at the second part of that public document. So Edmund just shared with you the public document version of the outline and an excerpt of what we're calling the mandate section. So we want to be clear about how we approach the review. And so that might actually be a more productive use of our time today to focus on that mandate section. Do we agree with what we see as our goals and our process, and just clarifying both among ourselves and the public what that process is, how we're organizing the review. Okay, but now with that in your heads, let me go back to my updates. So first of all, just a little background on this. In April 2020, the Delta ISB submitted a public comment to DWR on the notice of preparation on the Delta Conveyance Project, indicating our plans to review the environmental impact report. And at that same time, we highlighted areas from previous reviews on Delta Conveyance that DWR should consider when preparing a CIR. And DWR has provided updates in August 2020, January 2022, June 22, and July 22. that where we've learned a fair bit about this project, but also raised many questions. On July 27th, the EIR was released, and the comments are now due at the end of October, or 10/27. We submitted a letter formally requesting a 30-day extension on this. We have not heard yet. We understand from some public meetings that others have also requested extensions of 90 days usually. So we hope that with that preponderance of requests, we may be given an extension, but at this point we're operating as if we will not be given an extension. And speaking of the public meetings, DWR is hosting 3 virtual public hearings on the DCP EIR. One occurred on September 12th, and Steve attended that. And then there are 2 more, one on September 22nd from 12 to 2, and one on September 28th from 5:30 to 7:30. And we hope to send a representative to those 2. And you'll have additional information about all of this is in your meeting packet. So this is more to the public now. What are we doing with the EIR? What the ISB has done is divided up the chapters among its membership. It is a very large document, so we didn't all try to read all of it. And there is a copy of current chapter assignments in the meeting package. We are in the process of reviewing and commenting on the individual chapters, and we're planning on having a public draft of our comments by the October meeting. At this point, we're thinking that meeting will be virtual. And I will not be in attendance at that meeting. So Steve Brandt will be facilitating that meeting and taking the lion's share of getting the public comments on that. So we have an outline that we're going to look at, the one that Edmund just shared that's in our packet. And this includes a section on mandate process and approach. And that is where we are. So at this point, we're doing our best to review the adequacy of the science. And probably when we get into the mandate discussion, you'll see a little more details of how we've chosen our role. So I think I'll hold off on making any substantial public comments until we get into that discussion. Let's see, do we have any? Well, let's wait on public comments. Let's go ahead and Edmund, if you want to share, why don't we screen share the outline and the mandate and just have a brief discussion on this. Just to be clear, folks, we don't want to hear any of your individual comments at this point. We're kind of trying to keep this very high level, just in terms of, are we organizing ourselves well, and have we sufficiently judged our mandate? So just a quick, maybe Edmund, go one size up. Yeah. Okay, so basically we plan to give a very high level summary of the major findings, what we consider key issues. We'll discuss how we approach the review. We'll discuss some strengths of the draft EIR, of which we do see many, but then we also have many issues that we'd like to bring to the fore, and also make some suggestions about how to improve the draft EIR. So these are the topics we have organized so far, discussing the range of alternatives, how future conditions were identified, evaluation of specific impacts, including some issues that are brought up there in the subheadings, how impacts were compared across alternatives, how adaptive management was handled, whether there are missing elements and unanswered questions or other cross-cutting issues, and finally, just some readability issues that have come up about the draft, some suggestions there. So does anyone see anything that's really obviously missing at this point, or do they wish to strike anything? That's really all we're looking for at this point. And it may be that if there's enough similarity in content between sections, we will end up merging some of these too. So we'll have to see how that goes. Steve.
Yeah, I wanted to first comment a little bit about the public meeting and then make an overall general comment. I did attend a public meeting. It was 2 hours long, and it was over 200 people attended. It is recorded, so apparently at some stage you'll be able to watch it if you wanted to. And there were a number of people, of course, that, as Lisa said, that did request for an extension, most normally 90-day request for an extension. But one of the things that I do encourage you to listen to those public comments, because they were wide-ranging, of course, but also interesting points of view. I think it's worth us to listen to. That the thing I wanted to point out is that in the opening introduction by DWR, they had a slide that said tips for commenting, and one of the it said why should you comment, and I'm reading right from this slide. The opportunity to refine the analysis of environmental impacts and the development of feasible mitigation is one way. And it's the best way to make your lead agency aware of concerns, and of course the opportunity to address concerns related to any potential direct or indirect impacts. Again, this is a draft EIR. So one of the things we might think about is that in addition to either criticizing or praising certain elements of the science, we should also, in all of these sections, I think, if we have ideas, we should make suggestions on how to improve the document. I would think of it more like improve the document and the analysis. It looks to me like there's room to improve the analyses. And I think that we shouldn't hesitate, in my mind, to make those recommendations if we see obvious things to do there. I view it in a sense like a draft manuscript. When you review a draft manuscript, you point out the strengths and weaknesses, but a large part of it is also to make suggestions on how to improve it. We did this for the BDCP report. We did, in addition to pointing out the strengths and weaknesses, we had a section where we listed, I think it was 5 ways to improve the scientific framework. And then we had another 8 ways to improve the document itself in terms of listing assumptions up front and so forth. So I encourage you to look back at those, because a lot of those I think might still be relevant today. But at least as we think about diving into these topics, we shouldn't forget suggestions for improving the science or clarifying the science or looking for missing information and things like that somewhere, because I presume they're going to eventually do a final EIR, and that may entertain more analyses. So
Thanks, Steve. Those are helpful comments. And before I forget, let me say that Jay had a big hand in organizing this, so I want to give him credit for that. And then we just tackle him. So go ahead, Tom.
Steve stole most of my thunder. That third point, I think, is where the weaknesses could go. So some strengths and weaknesses.
Well, Tom, I think the way it's organized now is that key topics that span chapter reviews and all those headings that fall within that are actually the weaknesses that we would like to bring up. So although there's also some positive things in that section, but the point is that we don't want to forget to note the positive things, because it is so much easier to remember what we didn't like. So that's how things are organized right now. So we don't want to have strengths and weaknesses. We're going to have the summary of major findings, which will have strengths and weaknesses, and then we're going to break it down. Strengths here, weaknesses after. Does that work for you?
Not really, because I can think of one. I know we're not supposed to get specific here, but I can think of one global weakness that.
Well, yeah, there's going to be an opportunity for that under major findings, and
okay.
And also if your global problem doesn't fit into one of these categories right here, then feel free to suggest an addition. It doesn't have to be right now, but we can certainly add. But we tried to have cross-cutting issues included in these things. So, but yeah, we're happy to work with you to make sure your comment has an appropriate place.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about it without getting specific.
Yeah, let's hold off on that for now. But I just, think about whether you want to add something under 4 that would be a place for that. If you can generalize about again, you can just think about it. You don't have to say it right now. Okay. All right, Jay, please.
Thanks, Lisa. I think for our purposes here in this discussion, what we probably should be most interested in is the taxonomy under item 4, labeled here key topics. Would all of your major comments on the document fit within this kind of a framework? And if there's a big missing topic area that would be necessary to fit in a major topic, how would we add it to this taxonomy? Or is there a better taxonomy that you'd want to suggest?
Right, and it's probably helpful just to acknowledge that at some point we had it more broken down chapter by chapter, but we felt that because there's so much interaction between the chapters, we thought it would be more helpful to try and think more about these types of topics. I mean, I'm putting words in Jay's mouth, but that's why I assumed this change was made.
So my feeling on section 4 is that it should have all the major comments, the ones that rise above the others. So they might be specific to one chapter, or certainly major comments that apply to multiple chapters. For other comments that apply to only a single chapter, we have the appendix, Appendix A, which will be the comments on individual chapters. But we might find some of those individual chapter comments so important that we want to give more attention to it in section 4 is how I view it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for that clarification. And all I'm saying is, even though it might fit only under one chapter, we wouldn't necessarily put that, we wouldn't list that here. We would try to get to another more general level in terms of this reflects this problem, a broader
So the
problem.
rationale of this, much of this taxonomy is trying to avoid having 532 major comments, which nobody will read. To try to group all of our major comments under really a logic of policy analysis that says, okay, what are the range of alternatives? What's the identification of future conditions that you're going to evaluate performance on? How is the performance evaluated? And then how are the alternatives compared based on that analysis? And then we have a few other things that I think are of general importance, adaptive management and some other things. But are there other things that sort of rise to that level that would help us organize what will be fairly numerous comments?
Thanks, Jay. Thanks for that clarification. Steve.
Yeah, I agree with what Jay just said. I think that these are initially designed to be topics that cut across chapters or some chapters and so forth. And I wouldn't view these as all negative. In fact, initially when we were thinking about these, the thought was that it's a topic that should be discussed in depth. You know, like use of relevant science as an example. One could say, you know, the science was all relevant relative, you know, on these particular topics and really good here, and missed a couple of things here, and here's what I would suggest to do, we would suggest to do to improve the analyses. Same with mitigation. So the thought would be the strengths, the weaknesses, and areas for improvement or clarification in terms of the analyses under these topics. And then the question is, are there other cross-cutting topics that we can arrange, whether they're A's, B's, and subsets and so forth, those can all be reshuffled at the end in terms of how we actually outline the content of the report. But the thought is that consider each of these as sort of, in my view, equally good topics to look at or consider. We might merge them, but are there others? Is there something fundamentally missing here?
Thanks, Steve. That's helpful. Obey.
Unmute myself. Yeah, a couple of comments along the lines of, I think, what was just discussed. You know, the section 4, item 4 here, I thought earlier we discussed the strength and weaknesses, but we also, I think there was a mention of how this could be improved. I wonder if there should be a sub item under 4 how the weaknesses could be improved if they were to be done. I think that I didn't get that clearly on item 4. And the other comment I wanted to ask you was, this is probably a very high level, the apparent, I don't know, I don't want to use the word conflict, but the objectives of the overall project versus the constraints that they work under, primarily CEQA. That high level issue, is that going to be discussed under 2, or is that out of this discussion?
Yes, that's definitely in there. I'm trying to remember exactly where it is.
In number 2, and it's part of our paragraph, I think.
Right, we'll talk about that next.
Yeah, there's some of that, but there are also comments under D, I believe. Just sort of how did they go about comparing the alternatives? Did we consider that adequate? And so, and to your prior question about strengths, weaknesses, room for improvement, I think we're actually imagining that each of the subtopics under 4 would have a section like that. Plus or minus. We're not always going to have recommendation of how to improve. We're not always going to have a strength or a weak. We're not always going to have a weakness. So the, as well as it works, that's our current plan. But I think probably we, in our summary of major findings, we'll also want to elevate certain things about, maybe we'll organize the summary of major findings as you described too.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks. Joe, what you got?
Well, when I look at it, there's some strengths of the draft EIR, but similarly, we discussed about the strengths and weaknesses. The weaknesses are concerns that cuts across the whole, 35, 36 chapters. Are there major concerns when you kind of look at the whole thing? What are the things? So I think it's very important to have a section, some strengths of the EIR and also the major concerns cutting across.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Alternatively, we could get rid of 3 and nest it under the other topics. Yeah. But it is non-parallel. I see what people are saying. Jay, do you want to weigh in about how you were imagining that being covered? Did we just lose Jay?
What was that question again?
The question was, so people see this overarching, some strengths of the draft EIR. They don't see a parallel, some weaknesses of the EIR.
I would change the name of number 4 to major comments.
I do wonder what's distinct about 3 versus 1, right?
Every review should say something nice.
Yeah, but we have a lot of nice things to say. So
yeah. We could interweave them into number 4 and eliminate number 3.
Yeah.
Another alternative might be to change number 3 to put positive comments in with section 4. I had a whimsical thought of maybe we should color the positive comments in green and the more negative critical comments in red. I don't think we really ought to do that, but it might be interesting to sort of retitle 3 and reorient it to changes from previous EIR, EIS reports on this general topic.
As in like responses to prior comments kind of thing? Mm-hmm. Okay.
That might be
another
thing to do.
Okay, let's note that down. I'm sure our note takers are taking care of that. And yeah, we'll think about this more. Tanya.
Oh gosh, I think a lot of the comments that were brewing in my brain have been touched on already. I want to make sure that we have some clarity in section 4 if we're, are we going to include strengths there or are we not? That I think we need to just tease out. I worry a little bit about the kind of the length of section 4, at least we want to be comprehensive, but as Jay said, we also don't want to write a 500-page review. So yeah, I think we'll need to just maybe think a little bit about which of these could be combined or maybe tweaked a little bit. And I think the main thing is, I mean, I really like this outline overall. I think we can work with it. Main thing is kind of going back to Steve's initial point, which I think Obey reiterated as well, is just we don't want to lose sight on suggestions for how to improve and where there might be kind of limitations to the analytical approaches that were used. And I think that's buried in 4C somewhere, but not sure if it's explicit enough yet. So those are just my general observations. I'm agreeing with what's been stated already and just adding a little nuance to that.
Yeah, and I can certainly appreciate that there are a lot of categories, and then the subcategories aren't necessarily that different from the higher level categories is one issue I'm struggling with, but this it does seem to work pretty well for the content that we've been thinking about so far. So I think maybe when we see the specific comments, we'll see ways to.
Yeah, I think some of it's going to be decided once we start cutting and pasting and moving things around and really trying to fit everything together.
Yeah, and then perhaps F and G are going to go away because we kind of already have sort of missing things elsewhere, and so I think there's some kind of obvious simplifications we might do too. So especially if nobody has any other cross-cutting issues, which doesn't sound like so far we do, but so yeah, I think we will always be looking for simplification as we move forward. Virginia.
To go back to the strengths and weaknesses, a suggestion, it might work to make number 3 be general strengths and weaknesses of the report and kind of have high level things mentioned briefly there to avoid repetition in section 4. And for example, then I would put what Obey brought up, the requirements of CEQA from a scientific viewpoint present some of the weaknesses, because scientifically some of the things we'd like to have considered are not required to be considered by CEQA. And so that would be kind of a general comment, and there may be others. I'm sure there are others.
That sounds like a good suggestion to consider too. So we've had one option to change it to how did they address prior comments, but another way to go would be high level strengths and weaknesses that we just want to get out there. Bob.
Well, one of the advantages of commenting last is that everyone else has said all the things I would like to say, but anyway, I just have a couple of general thoughts on this. And first of all, I do like the outline in general. And I think it's a good organizing, or a good way for us to organize our initial writing. On number 3, I could see, first I was going to suggest that we drop 3, but I do like Virginia's idea of just having some general strengths and weaknesses, and perhaps even in there, weaving in how they have improved over prior iterations of the same same type of project and so forth. So anyway, I could see going a couple different ways there, but I have no problem in blending the strengths into number 4 as we go down through the list on number 4. Talking about the strengths as well as our individual concerns on some of these topics. I am, though, kind of personally concerned about one thing, and I know CEQA, the CEQA process is really not a particularly good one from a scientific perspective. And I think we should address this, but do it in a brief way in this particular report. I'm afraid that if we get into it too deeply, it's going to divert the attention away from the project itself and more onto the CEQA process. And so my suggestion is this: is that we treat this rather briefly but directly, probably in either 2 or 3, and consider that the ISB could possibly, and I think this would be very useful personally, is to prepare a separate memo or a separate short report on how the CEQA process could be improved from a scientific perspective for future reviews. I think decision makers, politicians, and so forth may find that to be extremely useful if we prepared a thoughtful document on how CEQA could be improved. Now, I know that's more on our plate than we got plenty, to deal with now, but to me, that could be an equally important product of this endeavor going forward. So anyway, just some thoughts, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more discussions in the coming weeks on the individual topics here. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And appreciate the sentiment that we want to be helpful. I think that's a key issue here. Okay, so if we don't have any more comments on the outline, let's go ahead and scroll down to the mandate section, which as of now, again, Jay has crafted most of this with some editing from others. And, basically just saying how did we see our responsibility? So, and something that we would like to include that's embedded in the title of the section, but not yet spelled out in the text, is a little bit more on our process. So, we have done some work. I'll just jump to that for a second, and then we can go back to the text. But the process that we haven't included yet is that, we divided up the chapters among members. We sent requests to DWR for additional information. So, we should acknowledge and thank them for that, being willing to engage on that. We have whatever else we've done, so we don't necessarily have to figure that out right now, but just I'd like to put that idea in your head of we would like to explain our process to be transparent. These 2 paragraphs deal more with our strengths and weaknesses, I would say, in that, we have a responsibility as specified in the Delta Reform Act to do this kind of oversight of programs. So we're reiterating the fact that we see this as part of our mandate to do this review and incorporate, different diverse perspectives, as I alluded to in my intro talks. And that we have focused on the areas where we have expertise and not necessarily only looked at it from a CEQA frame. And then we just acknowledge that, we're probably not going to get everything just right because of some of our limits in terms of understanding some of these details, but that there's still a strength to this outsider perspective. Our independence provides us with a strength that we can offer, whether, kind of like a dean's rep is what I'm thinking of on a students committee. There's someone who has seen a broader view of how science is done and can say whether this seems adequate in this situation. So that's an academic reference. For those who don't know, the dean's rep is kind of the quality control agent of a students committee. So that's how that paragraph turned out. So I see Tom already has a comment. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, the part that bothered me a little bit was that sentence that in the middle of the second paragraph, we will likely have missed some shortcomings. I would hope that a 10-member board of PhD scientists with multiple disciplines is not going to miss anything major. But if you want to qualify it with something in the areas where the board didn't have expertise, that might be a way of getting around it. But I don't think we want to cop out on the review by saying something like that.
Good point, Tom. Tanya?
Oh, on, just on Tom's point there, I mean, I think there are likely areas that we have missed, but maybe just adding that specificity on those areas where we don't have deep expertise. I mean, there's certainly chapters that I reviewed that I, can understand and comment on and provide some expertise on, but my expertise may be limited to a certain area of that analysis. So anyway, I think we need to make that statement somehow. My comment was going to be on, I guess, the second sentence of the first paragraph, or maybe it's the first sentence. It's a long sentence. I think, oh yeah, I think it's that second part of that sentence, that our focus is on, it's based on our ability to, our focus is on the EIR's ability to provide and organize the kind of scientific and technical information that would be useful for informing public and stakeholder discourse on the desirability of the proposed project. I mean, I would just add perhaps somewhere, and the adequacy of the science used to inform the analysis of impacts and their comparisons, or something specific like that. Because I like that sentence, but I think it's also one level up from our role of evaluating the science. The usefulness of that for informing public and stakeholder discourse can be a different question than how adequate is the science.
Yeah, I thought adequacy was implied in that, based on its ability to provide and organize. So maybe we want to wordsmith that part to be more clear. And I certainly, given how long the sentence is, I don't want to make it any longer.
Yeah, maybe we can tweak that a little bit.
Yeah. But I think if we're just really clear that we are not here to decide policy, it's only that we want the science to be adequate for those who would decide policy. So we can make that clearer.
Yeah. Thank you.
Steve.
Sorry, going back to Tom's sentence, given the limited time frame, I'm not sure we want to say we might have identified a few problems that may not have a substantial effect, because I think the kind of review we're looking at is looking at the big problems and looking at the big conclusions and looking at the overarching program. And I think that I don't know that we're going to identify something that's not substantial, and because I think that is really our goal, is to look for those kind of major things given the limited time. So I think that sort of puts a damper on anything we say. Someone can say, wait, that's the problem. You said you probably could. That's the one that you identified. So I would just eliminate that part of the sentence.
Well, I guess I want to hear more comments, but I'm getting the sense that the sentence isn't really serving its goal. Let me explain what I understand to be the goal of this sentence, which is, if you find something that we've slightly misinterpreted or possibly mischaracterized, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, is how I view this sentence. Is that we know that, lacking deep understanding of these systems, we may make a mountain out of a molehill, or we may get something slightly wrong. It doesn't mean there isn't a valid point in there. So, but I don't know if a sentence solves that problem. So we might just acknowledge that and just take the sentence out, and just know that some people will make a big deal of our minor mistakes.
I would prefer to take it out, because for two reasons. One is we don't do this in any of our other reviews, and that comment could apply to any one of our reviews. We don't qualify it by the fact that this review might have mistakes in it. So I would just let others make that determination. I would just eliminate that, because this is nothing. This is a review of the science like we review all other science in the Delta. So I don't think we make those qualifications. Secondly, if we want to be we have publicized a list of chapters we have not reviewed. And I think somewhere in BDCP, maybe in the appendix, we said we specifically did not look at these chapters. And I think it's okay to highlight those chapters that we did not look at. you know, and I would do that in our appendix. Maybe when we go into individual chapters, we can say that we specifically did not review these chapters.
We're probably not in depth. Yeah, there were some I read for context, but didn't make any comments. So somehow we need to walk that line. But
Well,
yeah.
there are some chapters that have no authors.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Okay. Those are good suggestions, Steve. I think maybe tentatively we can still revisit this, but for now, Edmund, how about just striking through given this limited time frame, and we'll but leave it there, like do a track changes kind of thing, and then we'll just acknowledge that, and then maybe also just highlight the part of the first sentence based on its ability to provide and organize. We want to maybe just turn that into more of a clear statement about adequacy of the science. So let's just capture that. You don't necessarily have to do it in this version if it's easier to just take note of that. But let's keep hearing some comments. Obey.
Yeah, I think maybe related to this, I also agree maybe this might weaken our review in some way, but I was wondering if we should make the point that we only reviewed what was available to us, the nature of the information. And if we had all the ideal information we would have had a more thorough evaluation. One example, there's a calcium-3 model at a monthly time scale, for example. We can only do so much with what is given to us. So is there any way to characterize that we evaluated what was available to us through the review document and any other, like the information that might have been provided to us?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Probably we could include that under some of ways to improve it. Like we would be able to understand these impacts better if we had this information. So it might be one way to go. I do note that we are getting very close to our time limit, right? Do I have that right? That we were planning to end in a minute?
Correct.
Okay, so let's hear, Joe, hopefully you can make your comment very succinctly and then we'll just talk about planning for the next meeting.
Yeah, so very quick. I completely agree with the sentiment that we shouldn't be apologetic. There are 10 experts giving the opinion, and we say that we are providing it within our realm. So we just want to make sure it's an authoritative document within the realm of our expertise. They don't like hate. It's your problem, but we do the best. That has to come across. So this is a little bit too apologetic.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, all right, and here's Jay. Here's Jay to apologize for being apologetic. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I guess when I was drafting this originally, it was for my own self, and my thought was, what's the probability I'm going to miss something out of 20,000 pages? Oh, I'd say it's pretty close to 1. What's the probability somebody else is going to notice it? If possibly it's close to 1. So I want to make sure that we let people know that we only had 90 days, and although 10 people are less likely to miss things than 1 person, there is a chance that someone's going to notice maybe even something big that we missed, and somewhere we ought to say that probably pretty gently, but I think we should say it somehow.
All right, we'll look for less apologetic ways to say that. Diane, welcome. We didn't acknowledge your coming to the meeting. But
I really apologize. I have a field trip with my class this morning, but one thing that struck me from this language is where we do say something is major because it passes this threshold of having a substantial effect. This gives us scope to point out what that substantial effect would be. Do you see that? So this comes up in some of the water quality themes where, violating water quality standards then has this cascade of substantial effects, even if you're only off by 50%. So I think that might inform how we present some of our major concerns. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that might work for water quality. It might not work well for other chapters, but let's take that into consideration.
Yeah, for water quality where there's real regulations and okay.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we're trying to stay away from specifics. So yeah, let's give that some thought. I think we could bring that up here in the mandate section of just sort of, how do we judge how did we even judge what we put in our major concerns is probably a really good thing to address. Yeah. Okay, get it. I got it. All right, good. Okay, well, let's wrap up this conversation. We'll have the editorial leads. We'll take all these comments into consideration and make some changes. And I am running late on my very first meeting. It's shameful, but all we have left to do is just talk about planning for the next meeting. So this will just take another minute. We won't keep people too long.
Lisa, we also have to take public comments as well for the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Item.
Thank you, Edmund. I'll learn as I go. Any public comments?
Yes, we do have one public comment from Deirdre Desjardins. But as a reminder for folks online, if you have a public comment, please use the raise hand function or send us an email at disb@deltacouncil.ca.gov. And if this is the first time where you're providing public comment, please feel free to briefly introduce yourself by stating your name and affiliation if you want to. It's optional. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Deirdre. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, it's Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. I wanted to say my background's in dynamical systems theory, and I really like the structure of the review that you suggested. I think it's a very good way to structure it. I did want to say, so the law that governs the Delta Independent Science Board review is partly the Delta Plan, which is a completely different section of code than CEQA. The Delta Tunnel Project, the Delta Conveyance Project, is required to conform with best available science, which is Delta Plan Policy GP1 subsection B3. And part of best available science is peer review. And I did write, as you know, the director of the Department of Water Resources and asked her to clarify whether what you were doing is peer review. It's very clear that 90 days is completely insufficient to do any kind of peer review, particularly when 6 members of the board are new. And this draft introduction shows that you're not clear whether you're doing a peer review. So the Delta Stewardship Council is in communication with the Department of Water Resources, and they've been early consultation, and they should have agreed on a process for peer review with DWR. And so I'm going to follow up my letter to DWR with a letter to them saying, you need to clarify what the peer review process is for best available science, because it may be that the Delta ISB's review is cited as the peer review when this comes before the Delta Stewardship Council for certification, in which case it will be a major legal issue that you weren't clear that it was a peer review and you weren't given time, and it will be litigated. The last findings were that I particularly sensed the draft findings the last time around were that DWR didn't use the best available science on sea level rise. So it is necessary for you to get time to review as technical appendices. It's part of the reason that I told you. I'm not sure why DWR isn't giving adequate time, but it's a major process issue at this point. And the Delta Stewardship Council, the right hand needs to know what the left is doing as far as the consultation between DWR and the Delta Stewardship Council about best available sites. Yeah, so I'm going to try to raise the issue, as you know, and work with an attorney and see that it's resolved. It may be that you're not doing a peer review, in which case that language is fine, but if you are, you need to be given appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre, for those comments. Steve, you just took your hand down. Did you want to say something? Oh, no, it is still up. Yeah.
I can comment when you get to item number 7.
Okay. Okay. So we'll wrap up. Edmund, did we have any other public comments?
There are no additional public comments.
Great. Okay. So now moving along to item number 7, we need to prepare for the upcoming Delta ISB meeting scheduled for October 13th. We already know that Bob Nyman and I will not be available, and Steve will be facilitating this meeting. This will be Joe's last meeting and Jay's last meeting, right? Jay, you're going to be there? Okay, good. And not good that it's your last meeting, but good that we'll have an opportunity to see you again. At that meeting, we're aiming to have a public draft discussion of the EIR. Members of the public are welcome to comment on it when it's posted, which we will try to do well in advance of that meeting as best we can, given the very tight time frame that we have. And we have not yet decided, no, that's October 25th. Oh, so we potentially are saving an in-person meeting for later that month when we would come together to finalize the EIR. So there's a tentative date of October 25th right now. I don't think that's set. Steve, what did you want to comment on?
Well, I see the schedule kind of laid out, but I don't know if this is an optimistic or pessimistic viewpoint, but if we get an extension, which I would, well, if we get an extension, we should think ahead of time of sort of a shadow schedule, because we should have that ahead of time, because we're talking about face-to-face meetings. We're talking about a time you're not going to be here. We're talking about our draft and so forth. And I think that we want to have the day or minute we get word of an extension, then we should have a plan laid out in terms of our regular meetings and face-to-face meetings. Right now, the way I think it's scheduled is October 25th is the day we vote on our final EIR. I think Jay will still be employed, but anyway, it's just something the chair should keep in mind as we move forward on scheduling, is to have a shadow one picked up, so we don't have to decide on it on the 13th. So
I see. Okay. Well, we'll take that under advisement. I think it is dangerous to assume we'll get a extension, and I would encourage us to work hard now so that we don't rest on that.
Yeah, it's not an assumption. It was just sort of a parallel preparation in case.
Yeah, understood. Okay, well, all right. So at this point, if we have any other items, any other public comments on any other agenda items or any non-agenda items?
I think we do have a public comment on preparation for future meetings from Deirdre Desjardins.
Okay, thank you.
Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, so I did want to say, I did ask Osha Maser, who's the attorney for Delta County's coalition, and if she thought we were going to get an extension, and she thought that the DWR wasn't planning to do one, or we would have gotten it by now. But the Delta Independent Science Board request is important, and I think there is some chance it would be granted. But yeah, don't count on it at this point. We're not counting on it. I did want to say I will be getting the board some more information, and when your published review comes out, I'll try to go over it and see if there's anything we got wrong. We're committed to supporting the board. We know there's many new board members who didn't get the year of funding to get up to speed on this. And one major thing which I corresponded a little with Edmund about is there's a requirement in the Delta Reform Act that any order by the water board approving the change in point of diversion to, allowing diversion of the North Delta intakes include appropriate Delta flow criteria. And there is just all of the information that was in the previous Twin Tunnels EIR is just gone. It's largely stated over, but the process of determining the necessary in-stream flows for the Sacramento River is really necessary. And if you look at the history of the projects, what's enduring long-term is not the water quality control plan standards, but the permit terms. So I juggling a lot of things. We're also doing a major look at why DWR projects Sac River flows will increase by 4% under climate change. And zeroing in on that seems wrong given what we're seeing now, and I'm zeroing in on why. And I'll also be getting a little bit of that to the board. That also relates to the water board's request that the board, that DWR analyze the project under drier, warmer quintiles, as well as the central tendency quintile in climate change modeling. And one of my blog posts that I sent you does go into that. So we'll be getting you more about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. Very good stuff. Okay, so with that was the comment on agenda item 7. Do we have, do we have any comments not related to any agenda item?
I did.
Right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think Deirdre has a public comment for that item.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I did want to say, so there's kind of some interesting social dynamics in the NGO and Delta community I work with. And there is some distrust of the academic community. And it was also expressed in comments to the science program and saying that they thought that, you know, it was hubris for academic scientists to be elevated over local Delta experts and agency scientists. So it's something I'm talking about social scientists with. It's definitely part of the social landscape, and it's something that we dealt with in our campaign to save the Independent Science Board, was educating people about the Independent Science Board and the importance of academic research. And fortunately, the opinions about independent science and academic science are a minority opinion, but it's something to be aware of, and it's not something that people in the independent academic science community hear very much, but I do hear it in discussions in the NGO, fishing, and Delta community. So thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. Yeah, we understand there's distrust in many areas, and you know, our job really, we just take our job very seriously to review the adequacy of the science, and we're not trying to do anything else. And so hopefully that's understood. So, okay, at this point, I think we are done with public comments. Any other final comments from the board?
What about agenda item 8? Sorry, this is
Uh-oh.
Lauren.
There's another agenda item. Oh, you see how I've fallen down on the job.
Edmund can help with that.
It's a review of follow-up items, but for the interest of time, you can just indicate that we're dropping that item and we'll recap it and post it.
I got an out. Good. Okay. Edmund will be sharing the follow-up items. And I thank you all for putting up with me for the first meeting, and I call this to a close. Meeting adjourned.